and welcome to the News Desk. This week, I'm Chris Stafford, alongside a new co-host, a guest co-host. Peggy Shin is joining me. You will have heard of Peggy before. She's been a guest on our show. She is a writer for Team USA. Do you call it teamusa.org? What do you call it, Peggy?
teamusa.org.
Yeah, got that right. Good. Well, thank you for joining us and sitting in the hot seat now, because Nancy is taking a couple of weeks off, and I thought no better person to fill that spot while she was gone than you. Have you recovered from back-to-back Olympic Games?
I thought I had, but I realized this week that I have not. I'm very tired still and sleeping a lot at night, really wanting to take a nap during the day. And I finally realized I just need to take a couple days off work and see if I can get my feet back under me. I've been helping my elderly parents, and my daughter, who's a senior in college, was home for 2 weeks in March. So a lot of family pull as I was trying to recover. So now I just need to kind of kick back and do some things I enjoy for a couple days.
One of which is?
Skiing. I'm going skiing after we hang up.
Lucky girl.
We just got a foot of snow a couple days ago.
And remind everyone where home is for you.
I live in Vermont, about 20 minutes from Killington Ski Resort.
You are such a lucky girl. I hope that is restorative and does everything that you need it to do. I can only imagine it would. You just kick back and enjoy the slopes, Peggy.
Yes, thank you. That's what I'm hoping for.
I am very, very envious of you. Well, just to remind everybody, you are listening to Season 4, Episode 13. We're recording on March 30th when this is released. And we have, as usual, a whole host of stories for you this week. So, Peggy and myself both been gathering the latest headlines. But before we move away from winter sports, Peggy, we have to acknowledge, because you did, as I said, 2 Olympic Games in 12 months, which is exhausting in itself. And then we had the end of the World Cup season. You're covering the winter sports as always. And we saw the end, as we reported here last week or the week before, even the end of the World Cup season with Michaela Schifrin, of course, had such a traumatic Olympic Games. She made a comeback with quite a flurry to end off her season. That must have been very satisfying for Team USA.
I think it was. Well, it definitely was. And I think it was great for Michaela, especially to win it by finishing so well in the Super G. We know her as a slalom and giant slalom skier, and she solidified her 4th overall Crystal Globe with that. I think it was 2nd place in the Super G. So I think Michaela probably will, regroup this summer, do her usual training. She trains harder than she's known for her great training ethic, work ethic. And I think we've got a lot more to see from her in the coming years. So
yeah, I think she took,
Michaela.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she took the pressure off herself there. And as you say, it was a surprise for her to finish so well in that discipline, because we don't usually see her we don't expect to see her on the podium in the Super G. No, I think she just took the pressure valve off, didn't she, after what happened in Beijing?
I think so. I mean, when she talked to us after every race in Beijing, she kept saying that it wasn't the pressure, like she didn't feel pressure. She just was really going for it. And, when you go for it, when you swing for the fences, sometimes you miss. And I think it was just bad luck that she missed at the Olympic Games, when most of the, world who doesn't typically follow skiing is following skiing. And I think as the months go by, she'll kind of look back and have a better idea of what happened. But I think it was, a culmination of a lot of variables, but I think bad luck was one of them.
Yeah, huge amount of bad luck. So good luck to get her for the next season. Hope she can put those demons behind her. And you also had something to celebrate in the cross country, didn't you?
Yes. So the cross-country ski season was cut short by a week because World Cup finals were scheduled for Russia, and FIS canceled all events, as most sports did in Russian territory. So they finished up in Falun, Sweden, and the final race, FIS put together a mixed relay for the first time ever. So it was 2 men and 2 women competing, each skiing 5 kilometers in the freestyle technique. And the U.S. fielded Rosie Brennan and Jessie Diggins for the women, and one Olympian, Scott Patterson, and a new guy, Zach Ketterson, in the men. And they won. It was amazing. I think I talked to Rosie about it. She said it was the most unexpected event ever, and it was so exciting and so much fun. And I think for them, it was great to finish a good sort of historic season with Jessie winning 2 Olympic medals in individual races, not just team races like the team sprint. I think it was a great way for them to finish the 2022 season and catapult themselves into 2023.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as they take a rest from the slopes and from the snow, and we have a rest from the snow and the ice, we are looking more towards tennis in this year. It's been extraordinary, the news that's come out of tennis, both on the men's and women's sides, but obviously we're focusing on the women's side of things. And right now it's the Miami Open, and the quarterfinals have begun, and Naomi Osaka beat Danielle Collins, and Belinda Bencic beat Daniela Gavrilova, who actually, she's Daria Seville, isn't she? She was Gavrilova, she was Russian. She was born in Moscow, wasn't she? And then she took up her husband's name, and when she became an Australian citizen, and she got knocked out as was expected. So now we're going through to the second quarterfinals, and I have to say, really, with this competition, I don't know how much of it you followed it, but there's been a few other stories apart from what's been happening on the court, what's been happening off the court, and the consequences of Ash Barty retiring, announcing her retirement now, and looks like Iga Swiatek will actually move up into the number 1 spot in the rankings when they're revised on April 4th, next Monday. So have you been following that at all, Peggy?
A little bit in my post-Beijing stupor. I've been reading about it and kind of catching it on TV at night. I think it's great that Ash Barty retired. I think she had a lot of good reasons for retiring. I don't know if we'll see her back, but never say never. And I think the rise of Iga, and I learned how to pronounce her last name yesterday, Swiatek.
Swiatek. Yeah, I think the Polish say but we say Swiatek. So Swiatek, I think, is good enough. Yes.
And I think it's great. I love tennis, and I love the full court game that she plays. You know, she played a lot of doubles as a junior. She's a 2018 Youth Olympic gold medalist in doubles, and that really improves your net game. And I love watching her. It's not just, you know, a lot of women's tennis had become that slugging from the baseline that men's tennis had become, but she's got a lot of great slice. She's got those amazing drop shots. She plays all over the court. She's got an incredible flexibility. And if she wins the Miami Open, and my money is on her, I think it's going to come down to Osaka and Swiatek. And my money's on the Polish tennis player. And if she wins the Sunshine Double, which is the Indian Wells and the Miami Open, she joins an elite group of 4 tennis. Steffi Graf, Kim Clijsters, and Victoria Azarenka are the only 3 women to have accomplished this feat. And Iga has some elements of all these players' game, particularly Clijsters' flexibility. So I'm eager to watch the final. And I have a friend who's got tickets to it live. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, I totally with you here. I mean, she's on the rise. And when that happens, you know, confidence builds confidence, doesn't it? And now with Ash out of the picture, so to speak, I think she has on form the everything going for her right now. And Naomi Osaka, of course, hasn't played as much. So I think she can be beaten. But let's not forget that Kvitova is playing. Also, we can't rule her out. She's playing. I know she's 28th seed, I think, there, and Swiatek is second. But she has got to beat her. And in the other quarters, it's Paula Bandosa and playing the American Pegula. So I think I'm with you on the outcome of this. I think everyone seems to be rooting for Iga right now.
Well, and she's. She has been the underdog, and I think it's always interesting to watch a tennis player rise. And I think what's going to be interesting is once you're number one, you no longer are the hunter, you are the hunted. I think once you're the hunted, it's a whole different mentality. And it's interesting to see how different people are able to manage that. So it'll be interesting to see how Iga can, withstand being number one. And hopefully she can just put it out of her mind and keep playing the amazing tennis she's been playing.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. Well, good luck to her. We'll, of course, cover it next week on the show, the outcome of this Miami Open. Now, staying with tennis, what did take women's tennis by surprise the other day, and everyone that was watching, was when Victoria Azarenka actually walked off the court and abandoned her game against a 16-year-old player. I thought was pretty bad timing, obviously, pretty shocking for everybody, but she says she shouldn't have gone on the court that day. As I said, it was pretty tough on the Czechoslovakian player, that Linda Fruhvirtová. There's another one for you to pronounce, Peggy. Fruhvirtová. She's so young, and she'd be playing Azarenka at the Miami Open is a big enough occasion, but to watch her walk off court, I think must have been pretty devastating for her, left behind. And that's something she will never forget. But the focus was on Victoria, because she's had so many personal issues that she's dealing with. She said she couldn't stand the stress anymore. And we've heard a lot of this, haven't we, with tennis players and other sports as well. Mental health has been very much in focus.
It is. And I think it's, yet another chapter in this long book of athletes showing that they're human and needing to focus on their mental health, just like the rest of us. We all have personal issues that bubble up. I'm not sure what she's going through. She's very private about her life off the court. And I don't know what to say other than I hope she gets her personal life sorted out. If it's involving her child, my heart goes out to her. I know her son is 5 now. So, best of luck to her, but I hope she can get that sorted out before she comes back on the court, because as you said, it's devastating to be standing there and all of a sudden your opponent walks off and you're wondering, is it something I did?
Right. Apart from win the last point and be leading in the game, leading the match altogether.
Right.
Linda Fruhvirtová was actually leading 6-2, 3-0.
Right.
When Azarenka, and Victoria's twice her age. So,
oh gosh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that's a big sort of difference. It's a big impact, I think, on a young teenager who's just starting to make her mark in the on the tour there. So I hope she's not too scarred by that. And good luck to Victoria, because she clearly has some demons to deal with in her personal life. We've heard it, Azarenka, as well as Naomi Osaka, of course. We've heard so many cases of not just tennis, but as I said, other sports where the athletes have had to just take some time out. Simone Biles, of course, is a story you, I'm sure, covered when you were in Tokyo. Yeah, and I think it's good that we can all acknowledge that mental health is important, and we can acknowledge now when when we're struggling with our mental health, whether we have anxiety or, whatever, what crap is being foisted upon us. So I think it's good that these people in the spotlight are showing that it's okay to step away. I don't think it's okay to go storming out of a meeting or storming off the court. You kind of wish that she could have played, even if she was going to, get bageled. I kind of wish Azarenka could have stayed on the court for those 3 more games, just to see it out. But it's also hard to, as you're an established former number 1 player, to be beaten by, as you said, somebody who's half her age. But, that's part of the game, that's part of why you're getting paid. So I can see it from both ways from Azarenka. But at the same time, I think it's a continued reminder that we all need to be open about our mental health and take care of ourselves. And we can't perform at our best unless we're both physically and mentally in a good place. And moving along on the tennis front, another tennis story, of course, that was shone a light on during the Oscars this past weekend was that of the story of the Williams sisters in the film that was made, Kim William. And not least of all because the actor Will Smith really stole their thunder, didn't he, right in front of the world's audience. I just thought that, talk about unsportsmanlike behavior, I think right there was unsportsmanlike behavior, losing your cool, losing your temper, in front of a global audience. What did you make of it all? I saw Serena, or was it Venus, just covered their eyes. They just couldn't watch it.
Yeah, I can't remember which sister covered her eyes. Yeah, I agree. He was winning. He won an Oscar for the lead role in a sports movie about the Williams sisters' dad, Richard. And here he was showing just, behavior that you don't expect to see, beyond the elementary school playground. And, I could see him wanting to stand up for his wife. I mean, you shouldn't pick on somebody. A comedian shouldn't pick on something for people that people can't help. But it is part of the shtick. It was part of hosting the Oscars. And I think Will Smith really just put another bump in the road for the Williams sisters, who've already had a bumpy road in their decades-long career. And I'm afraid that people are more likely to remember the slap in the face, the slap heard around the world, more than they're going to remember what he won an Oscar for, which is sad.
Yeah, it's very sad. Talk about diverting attention from what we were there for, and that was to celebrate the winner of in the film industry, right across the film industry, and some say that he should have his Oscar taken away from him for that behavior. What do you think about that?
I haven't really thought about that, but that seems like perhaps a reasonable outcome. I'd have to think about that. Yeah.
Inappropriate behavior,
right.
And
right.
Discrediting the Oscars, certainly. I'm sure that conversation will take place on many other podcasts, Peggy.
Yes, but one good thing from the Oscars that I wanted to bring up, it's really fun to see some of your favorite sports stars in these just incredibly elegant gowns. Like Serena and Venus were dressed to the nines, as was Kaylee Humphries was there too.
She looked fantastic,
yes, Kayla. With her tattoos, her gown just sort of framed her tattoos. So I think it's always fun to see, all your favorite stars just dressed to the nines in all these elegant gowns and tuxedos.
Yes. As long as they can stay in them. I will say no more.
What do they use? Double-sided tape? I was wondering.
I'm just going to leave that to people's imaginations because, again, this will be discussed on many other podcasts. So let's turn our attention to a sport which I know you are not as familiar with, but it's something that we cover here whenever we can, and not least of all because it is the Cricket World Cup right now taking place in New Zealand. Have you ever watched a cricket game, Peggy? Is it something that's alien to you?
It is very alien to me. I mean, a sport that's named after a bug in the U.S. is alien to all of us. But at the same time, I know it's
thought of that.
It's so popular worldwide, and I wish for that reason it would make the Olympics. But I need to learn more about it. But isn't it like sometimes watching baseball is like watching paint dry? So isn't watching cricket like watching paint dry, but for days?
Oh, we're not going to go there, Peggy.
Okay, I know it's one of your favorite sports.
You're talking to a former cricket player and a great fan of the sport. So I'm just going to let that one slide.
Well, and my husband is a huge baseball fan, so every time I say that about baseball, he just looks at me and he's like, "You just don't understand the subtlety of the sport." I'm like, "No, I don't."
Well, I'll go with your husband right now on that one. Well, let me just say that right now it's the semi-finals of that Cricket World Cup taking place, as I said, in New Zealand. And England, having had a really poor start to this tournament, as did New Zealand, They turned things around when they beat Bangladesh, which has elevated them to the next round, that is the semi-finals, where they'll play South Africa. And that actually takes place, as we're recording this, Peggy, it takes place this evening, our time, late, I think about 9 p.m. Eastern, which will be Thursday morning in New Zealand. And the winner of that game will face Australia, who are unbeaten in this tournament, and they'll be very, very tough to beat in the final. So I'm not going to put any money on anybody right now, but I think Australia have just been on such cracking form, and they were on great form for the T20 series in Australia when they beat England there too, leading up to this World Cup. So we'll have the very final outcome of this for you on the show next week. Now, talking about colonialism and Commonwealth sports, Peggy, the Six Nations Rugby tournament, which is the 15s, of course, it takes place in England following the men's tournament. That got underway this past weekend, and I have to say, kudos to England, because they absolutely slammed Scotland by 57-5. I know with rugby you can have an enormous score like this, which really doesn't necessarily tell the true story of a game. But suffice to say, it was a convincing margin and a convincing win for England and the Red Roses to get off to the start of this tournament. And Wales beat Ireland, and France convincingly beat Italy by 39-6. Now, if any of you follow rugby sevens, not rugby sevens, we're talking about the Six Nations right now, which is the 15s. If you follow that in the men's, which took place just before the start of the women's, and that was concluded in France when France beat England's men's pretty convincingly too. So the way that France have got off to such a great start in the women's tournament, and England have too, this could well finish up, Peggy, with another clash between England and France to decide the winners of this tournament. But it's a thrilling tournament, and I'm so glad that TikTok is sponsoring this tournament this time for the first time, and it's getting great TV coverage. Peggy, now tell us what you've been following about this, because I want to lead on to the coverage and how many stories we've had in women's sports. They've been making headlines this year already.
Well, being a colonialist over here in the American colonies, I had never heard of Six Nations Rugby until you brought it to my attention this morning. My first impressions are, I find it hilarious that England, Scotland, and Wales are three of the six countries, because isn't the UK a country? I guess we have a different definition of nation. And
well, we do when it comes to rugby.
Yes.
And cricket.
And my other main takeaway is, who's going to win the wooden spoon?
Early days to say who will win the wooden spoon. Very early days. We've got a few more rounds to go of this Six Nations. Everyone has to play everybody. There are 5 rounds of this tournament. So early days. Let's pick that up next week. And by the time we get to the end of this tournament, we will announce who won the wooden spoon right here on the Wisp News Desk. So I hope you listen every week. You'll find out, Peggy.
I will. I will wait with bated breath. I do love rugby, though. I shouldn't disparage. I actually love rugby. I covered rugby sevens, and it's a thrilling, fun sport, easy to follow. And if I will, after learning about Six Nations Rugby, I'm actually going to follow it now.
There you go. Yeah. And, we talked before about the 15s and then the 7s, and the rugby 7s are just as thrilling because they're so fast in such a short time span. Very dynamic games, the short and the long format of rugby. And, as a nation, the US is just getting better and better, it's certainly in the 7s. And England, too, I've been watching their rise, the English Roses there, the Red Roses, as they call them. They've done tremendously well as a team, just getting better and better each year. And Poppy Cleall is one of their players. She's on the England squad. She plays for the Saracens as a club team. She's been the host of a rugby show here in the past, so we always follow Poppy. So good luck to England. We'll keep you posted here as the tournament unfolds. Well, we're going to turn now to NCAA women's basketball. There is something called the Final Fours happening right now, Peggy, and this is our equivalent to the Six Nations or the Cricket World Cup, isn't it? Because this is a big deal here.
Good point. And yeah, basketball, I guess, is I don't know the history of basketball. I don't know where it started, but it does seem to be quite the American sport now. And I have to be honest, I haven't really followed the women's or the men's Final Four, this past month, just because March, I get so busy following the end of the ski season. But I do know who's in the Final Four, South Carolina versus Louisville, and UConn, University of Connecticut versus reigning champion Stanford. They're playing on April 1st in Minneapolis. But what I'm finding interesting this year is that the top female basketball players are reaping the benefits of the NCAA's new policy to let athletes receive endorsements and make money off their names. And from what I've read, after college football, women's basketball players are earning more than some of their counterparts in the men's tournament. Women like Paige Buchers for UConn, she's been in Gatorade ads, and you've got to know she's making some pretty good coin off of that. And I've also found it interesting, scanning through the sports pages, there's tons of women's stories about the women's Final Four now. And it's sort of as if reporters and editors are suddenly realizing that, hey, there's all these cool stories on the women's side, and they play a pretty awesome game too. There's stories about Aaliyah Boston and freshman Olivia Miles, who led Notre Dame into the round of 16. And it's also interesting to compare and contrast this year's tournament in Minneapolis with last year's, when Oregon's Sedona Prince tweeted her famous video of the women's accommodations at the NCAA tournament. And, this year, apparently the women are getting swag. They're getting a lot more TV coverage, and it's a case of social media doing good.
Yeah, it really is. I think women are finally coming into their own in many sports, don't you find? As I said, we're making the headlines more and more. We're not just the backstory or tucked away in a corner column. We are making headlines, and I think and across different sports. And I think that the one thing that I hope those organizations, groups that are covering women's sports in the media open up their coverage a little bit more, instead of just focusing on the mainstream sports in this country, which often happens. It's basketball, it's baseball, and it's soccer for so many. That's where the biggest crowds are following. But to me, that does a disservice and makes all the other women's sports invisible, Peggy. Do you have a thought about that? Because I think it's a shame when they forget all about, because there's world champions in every sport, isn't there?
There are world champions, and I've heard people say, watching women's sports just isn't as interesting because they're not as fast or they're not as aggressive. They might not be, they might be. I've seen some pretty aggressive games and sports that women play, but I've also heard people say they like watching women's hockey more than men's because it is less physical and there's a lot of finesse. So I think it's not apples and apples, it's apples and oranges. They might be playing the same game, but they play it differently. And I think you can learn and be inspired from watching both men and women. The women, we have to use a lot more finesse and, I would argue, skill to compete at the highest level. And it just makes it a different game to watch.
Yes. Yeah, it is a totally different game. But also, I think it's the stories behind the sport, it's the stories off the court that, are so compelling across women's sports. The challenges that they face for all kinds of different reasons to the men, to get where they get. Somewhat disadvantaged probably with facilities at sports clubs around the country and equipment as well. And they may be struggling to keep a job or raise a family. They have different struggles. But there's a lot of human interest stories there, a lot of amazing stories that, we try and cover some of them, but there's so many more. But, there's a lot of sports between archery and wrestling, and I just hope more groups cover all of those stories and not just handpick the cherries, of the mainstream sports. But yeah,
right.
That's my thought. Any thoughts to add to that, Peggy?
Well, and that's one of the reasons I like covering sort of what you might call the marginal sports for teamusa.org, because you can uncover some of these. We've all read about, I love writing about Michaela. I think she's one of my favorite athletes, but pretty much everything there is to know about Michaela has been written already. You come across somebody who hasn't been in the news, and they have just as interesting of a background and story to write about, and it's inspiring. And I love covering those athletes and bringing their stories to light.
I totally agree. Well, there's one athlete who we do want to keep in the news, and that is the basketball player Brittany Griner, who, of course, has been incarcerated in Russia, accused of carrying illegal drugs into the country. She has spoken to U.S. officials, apparently, since we last reported this on the show here. And it's a story, Peggy, of course, that's impacted not just the sport, but it is getting onto mainstream media here. That there was thought that we should keep it very quiet because if we put too much currency on her, this would work against her. But I think it's important. If this was a man, I have to wonder how much more coverage that they would have got. Peggy, what are your thoughts on this? Because it doesn't look good for Brittany right now. I know her trial has been delayed until May, so a hearing. So do you have any thoughts at this point? I think we're seeing a little bit more coverage, but it's frustrating from a U.S. point of view.
Well, I just feel horribly for her. I just can't imagine. You wonder if I just can't imagine any athlete bringing drugs into a country. I mean, they all know better. We all know better. So how did this happen? And, are the Russians hoping that this famous athlete will be in the news more? And if she's not, will she be released? I just can't imagine what she's facing in Russian prison. I was terrified to go to what we called COVID jail in China if we tested positive, and this is orders of magnitude worse. So I hope she gets some good advice and some good legal advice and gets home soon.
Yes, absolutely. But we will continue to cover that as we have updates on her story. Well, we're going to move on to swimming now, because you've got a story about NCAA swimming and diving championships, Peggy.
So actually, the women's NCAA swimming and diving championships happened 2 weeks ago. Men's just concluded on Sunday. They're not held together. They're two individual championships. And I was really impressed. I think we saw at the Tokyo Olympics last summer, there were quite a few young swimmers on the team, young women who were freshmen, sophomores in college. And those women, they won medals. Some of them won medals in Tokyo, and they came home and they just dominated the NCAA swimming championships, particularly Alex Walsh, who won a silver medal in the 200 IM in Tokyo. She won 3 individual championships for University of Virginia. Her sister Gretchen, who's older than she is, also at UVA, won some medals at the NCAAs, but not gold medals. And we also saw Kate Douglas for UVA win several individual titles. So I think it just bodes well for the future of swimming as we see some of the older stars like Allison Schmidt and Katie Ledecky, start to reach kind of the ends of their careers, to see this really dynamic young group of swimming Olympians coming up. It just shows that the depth of U.S. swimming is continuing to remain. It's a very deep pool. Ha ha.
It is a very deep pool in this country, isn't it? I mean, I would say that swimming is one of our power sports, even though people only talk about swimming during an Olympic Games, but there's a lot more to it because there's tremendous depth and breadth in as you say, in the pool across college sports. There
is, and I think because swimming is a college sport, I think that serves as an incubator for these young swimmers who, before Title IX, pretty much had to give up their careers, by the time they were 18 years old, because no college had a program for swimmers. Well, now for female swimmers, but now they can use their college years to train in some of the best programs in the world, like, Stanford, UVA, Cal Berkeley have some of the strongest swimming programs in the world. And a lot of foreigners come to train here, like Canadian Taylor Ruck for Stanford. She won the 200 freestyle at the last 2 weeks ago with NCAA championships. So I think it's a shout out to the colleges for, paying for these programs.
Well, Peggy, before we go this week, I just wanted to mention one of my all-time favorite tennis players, Gabriela Sabatini, the Argentinian player, is playing in the French Open Veterans. So I am really looking forward to seeing that as much as we can, because she's one of my favorite players, as I said, always has been. She's now turning 51. And I haven't seen her play much in the veterans tournaments, but of course she was extremely successful on the Grand Slam tournament. She won the US Open. She was a finalist at Wimbledon, several semi-finalists, semi-final position in the Australian and French Open. That was one of her favorite tournaments. So very excited to see her go back there. Is she one of your favorites? Who's one of your all-time favorite tennis players, Peggy?
Well, I remember her. She was a favorite of some of my old roommates back in the day, back in the, what was it? I guess it was the 90s. And so I remember watching her play. But what I love is just veterans coming back. It's like, I'm in my 50s and yay, I still want to get out there. I'm skiing this afternoon. So it's just inspirational for a reminder that we can all remain active. And I also love that they bring some of the old style play back. Like racket technology has changed so much since her prime. So how has she adapted to it? And does she still play like she used to? So I just find it interesting to watch from a lot of different levels. And I love it when all the old tennis players come back. It's
a very good point about tennis rackets. I'm sure she, plays for fun. Anyway, so she's probably adjusted to it, but maybe not in a competition setting. And one of my favorite strokes of hers was her backhand. The way she opened her shoulders for that backhand at top spin that she had was just extraordinary. She was an all-round. We talked about these all-round players earlier, Peggy, and she was one of those all-round players. She could play from the baseline and from the net.
And I think that, to me, that's true tennis.
Yes, I agree.
Using the entire court, it's using everything that's put on the court to make the game what it is. So I'm old. I like the old school play. So not that my net game is very good, but I do enjoy watching full court players who have a lot of weapons in their quiver. Absolutely.
Well, one day I would love to get on the court with you, Peggy.
You'd probably annihilate me. But
no
it would be fun.
way. No, you have the advantage of youth over me, don't forget.
Well, as long as we could laugh. That's my main priority when I play tennis. You must laugh.
Oh, with any sport, you have to laugh. And speaking of, it's never too old to have a go. If anyone listens to the show regularly, you may have heard me mention that I'm doing a 375-mile bike ride with my friend Marcy Cornegay. We were going to be doing this. It's the Potomac Heritage Trail from the East Atlantic coast all the way northwest up through Washington, D.C., the Cumberland Falls, and on to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're starting on April the 19th to do this. And once we decided to do this, and then afterwards, Ukraine happened, the war in Ukraine, and we decided to raise money for the Ukrainian refugees, which we are doing online. We've set up a page on justgiving.com/riding for Ukraine, where you can contribute to that cause, and it is the World Central Kitchen is our chosen charity who are feeding the thousands and thousands, the millions of refugees. So we thought it a worthwhile cause. So Peggy, this is going to be the longest bike ride I've ever done. If you would like to come and join us, you are welcome at any time.
My neck and butt hurt just thinking about it right now. I've been on my bike once so far this year, but after we are off this podcast, I am going to go to justgiving.com/riding for Ukraine and make a donation to your effort.
Well, thank you very much, Peggy. And thank you to everybody who is supporting this cause. It really, really is important. But before we go, I do want to thank you, Peggy, for joining me this week. I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time and that you've enjoyed being a guest co-host on our news desk. And I hope you'll come back.
Yes, well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun just talking about women's sports with you. So I always enjoy bantering with you.
Excellent. Now, remind everyone where they can find your writings and how they can follow you on social media.
My articles are on teamusa.org. I've got a couple coming up this week or early next week on cross-country skiers Jessie Diggins and Rosie Brennan. On Twitter, I'm at Peg McShin. The Mick is a token to my maiden name, McKay. I am Scottish through and through. So Peg McShin on Twitter and Instagram.
Oh dear! Then now that explains why you cringed when I said how England convincingly beat Scotland in the Six Nations tournament. That's not what you wanted to hear as a Scottish woman.
No, my father is Ferguson Mackay. So yeah. He's never worn a kilt, but we have a tartan.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Peggy, for spending time with us. You can, of course, find the show notes at wispsports.com, and you can follow us on social media at Wisp Sports. So do join in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.